Okay, so we're going to have a go at a different bloom as you go variation. So you said make it simpler in terms of the stitch that is left for the next round or row to work into. So let's make it a little bit simpler. So in the case of this particular project, I'm just making a little cozy. So I'm going to make the flower a little bit differently than what I might make, say, for a scarf where I want a smaller flower. But anyway, let's show you the technique, which is the same no matter what item you're making. It's just that you might make the flower a little bit differently. But the flower is made in the row or round, the same row or round, irrespective of the flower design that's used. So what I'm going to do is work the stitches first that we make the flower in. So for this particular variation, I'm actually going to do the double crochet stitches first, so 2 of those. Then I'm going to work, so I've got 2 there, then I'm going to work a puff stitch variation. So what I'm going to do is pull up through those loops until we have, so let's say 9 on hook. This is quite thick yarn, so you might just want to have 7 loops on hook if you have a thick yarn like this one. Maybe better, but anyway, I now have 9. So what I'm going to do is yarn over and pull through all but the last loop on hook, and yarn over and pull through both those loops. So now we've got this modified puff, and it has what I refer to as this little gap here, which is the eye. So that's important because we're going to use that for one of our petals for the flower. And the final thing we're going to do, all in that same stitch from the previous round or row, is work another double crochet stitch. Right, so in that one stitch we now have 2 double crochets, then a modified puff stitch, and then another double crochet. Right, so this is where it gets interesting because we make our flower. So this particular stitch post here, that last double crochet that we made, we're going to make 2 petals in it. We might make a 6-petal flower just to show you how to do that. So we're going to make a petal just in this loop that's sitting under the puff there. So 1 petal in that loop, and then the second double crochet that we made, the stitch post, we're going to make 2 petals around that stitch post, and then we're going to finally make a petal in the eye there of the puff. So let's get started. So the petal design, like I said, you can vary that. You can make them short, long, thin, thicker, whatever you want to do. But let's just make, say, chain 3, and we're going to make a half double crochet. Sorry, a half treble crochet. And then let's do chain 3 again. And slip stitch back into that stitch. We could make these petals a bit thicker if we wanted, but let's just, for the sake of actually showing you how to make the petals into the stitches that we've just made, let's just make them fairly simple. So basically you're making the petals the same way each time. I know some flowers do have slightly different shapes of petals, like things like petunias, so I mean you could vary that too if you wanted. You can really do whatever you please. So you can see now we've got 2 petals in that one location. We've worked over the stitch post, that last stitch post that we made. All right, so now we're going to move across to the next location. So we have to slip stitch into that particular location. So it's going to slip stitch into that loop, like so. Make sure that slip stitch is nice and tight so it's not obvious. The only reason we slip stitch is just to get across to that location, not for the sake of the slip stitch itself, to have that as a stitch that counts or is, you know, visible to in the flower. So same with when you're slip stitching back into the location. Again, make it nice and tight. You want the slip stitches to be clean, not overly visible. So now you can see we've got a petal in that second location there. So 2 petals in the first location, 1 petal in the second location. Now we're going to slip stitch across to the third location, which is the second double crochet stitch that we made, the post of that stitch. So we're just slip stitching into that post. You could really treat it the same as if that was, say, you know, a chain 3 space. You know, as you just slip stitch into a chain space, just treat it the same way when you're slip stitching sort of over the top of this post, the stitch. So now I'm just going to do exactly the same thing. So we're going to make the 4th petal, and then we're going to do the same thing as we did before. So because that stitch post is reasonably long, we've got quite a bit of space there. We're going to actually then use it to make that next petal as well, like so. All right, so like I said, you can change up your petal design as you like. Doesn't really matter. The main thing is just the stitches that you make to enable you to make that flower as you're working in the same row around, and the locations you work the petals into. So I'm just now slip stitching across to my last location, which is the eye of that modified puff. So that's a smaller space. So again, we're just working just 1 petal into that space. So let's work that last petal, and then we can have a look at it and see what it looks like. And I'll show you the stitch that we'll be using in the next round to ensure that we maintain the stitch count for the location in which this flower was made. All right, so there we go. So we have the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th petal. Now, if you were to only want to work 5 petals, my personal preference is to drop this particular petal. And it will look okay when you don't have a whole bunch of stitches here between the 2nd and what will be, in that case, the 3rd petal. So yeah, what you would do in here, instead of working a petal, once you've slip stitched into that location, you just slip stitch into the post instead. So you basically skip making the petal and just slip stitch across. So all you're doing with these slip stitches is just getting to the location that you want to make a petal next, essentially. So yes, 2 over the stitch post, 1 in the loop at the bottom of the puff, or you could omit that and slip stitch across to the next stitch post, 2 in the stitch post over here, and then 1 in the eye of the puff. And then you have a pretty little flower that's made around. Now, if you wanted to, you could pop a button over the top of the puff there as well. A cute little button. So that looks really nice as well. The other thing that you can do is, once you've made the 2 double crochets, the puff and the double crochet that you're going to make the flower over, you can actually just join into that first stitch post there a different colour. So you can actually have a pretty flower that has 1 colour puff in the middle and another colour for the petals around the outside. So that's really fun as well, particularly I guess if you're making something like a blanket, and you might want to actually just have, like, you know, a whole bunch of flowers that have the same centre but different coloured petals. That would be super fun as well. So that's a really good idea. And what I want to show you is that if we pull this flower aside here, so you'll see obviously these are the stitches that we're going to work into, in this case in the next round, but it could be rows if you're working in rows. And to note that from the stitch from the previous round, that we still have this stitch available here that we can work in the next round. So we'd be working along here, we work into this stitch that maintains the stitch count, and then we work behind the flower, and then we find the next free stitch that's available. Now this is a little bit confusing sometimes, but it's kind of hidden a little bit. It's the stitch just straight after the flower there. But you'll know anyway, because you'll be counting your stitches each row around, and you're wanting to make sure basically that you're maintaining the stitch count each row around. So if you get to the end of the round, you think, oh gee, I'm one stitch less than what I should be, chances are you've just missed this particular stitch in here, and it should become evident if you go back. So anyway, I hope that's helped a little bit. It is super fun, so I hope you enjoy that.